I never thought that the cruelest betrayal could wear a smile so calm it almost felt rehearsed. That morning, the air was still cool enough to taste, a crisp mix of dew and the faint scent of my own lavender perfume, the one I'd bought for this trip. I'd been up since dawn, smoothing the hem of my blouse for the 5th time, checking my passport again and again as if the photograph inside might fade if I didn't keep an eye on it. For months, I had counted down the days. A full week in Africa, my dream. Luxury lodges with white sheets and mosquito nets tied like ribbons. Safaris at sunrise, where the air carries the wild musk of elephants and the dry, baked dust of the savannah. Evenings watching the horizon melt into amber, with a glass of South African wine in my hand. I had planned it all, down to the smallest detail. Paid for every ticket, every transfer, every tip. I'd even handpicked her safari outfits, folding each one with care, tucking little packets of citronella wipes between the fabric so she'd stay safe from bites. The car keys felt cold in my palm as I drove to her house. My daughter, my only child, she'd been quiet lately, distant in ways that kept me awake at night. This trip, I had told myself, would fix that. We'd share laughter over giraffes peeking through treetops, whisper secrets in the hush of the veldt, remember who we were to each other. When I pulled up, she was already outside, suitcase in hand. Relief bubbled in me. Maybe she was excited too. But as I stepped out, my relief shrank to something sharp and small. She wasn't dressed for the airport. She wore jeans and a pale sweater, as if she were going to a Sunday brunch. And that smile, not the warm one I'd raised her with, but a tight, smug little crescent that didn't reach her eyes. "Mom," she said, tilting her head, "I'm not going with you." At first, the words floated in the air like a feather. I thought perhaps I'd misheard. My ears hummed. The birds were still chattering in the trees, but they sounded far away. "I'm going with Melissa. My stepmother needs a rest, so we decided to take her." Her tone, light, almost airy, cut deeper than if she'd screamed. My breath caught. "You decided?" I asked slowly, my voice tasting of metal. She nodded, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. A casual, almost bored gesture. "She's been so stressed, Mom. It just makes more sense." I glanced at the suitcase in her hand. A new leather bag, the same one I'd sent her last Christmas. My gift. She was gripping it tightly, her nails painted the same coral pink I'd worn when she was a girl, when she used to sit on the edge of my bed and beg me to paint her tiny hands the same color. The morning sun was rising behind her, casting long shadows across the pavement. The smell of freshly cut grass drifted over from a neighbor's yard. I noticed my own fingers tapping against the car door, an old habit when I was holding back words I might regret. I wanted to shout, to tell her about the months of planning, the money I'd scraped together, the nights I'd sat up imagining us laughing under African skies. But instead, I looked at her face, my daughter's face, but harder now, sharper, and I understood something. She wasn't asking. She wasn't apologizing. She had already rewritten the ending to my story, without even bothering to tell me until the morning it began. My heart didn't shatter. No. It folded inward, like a paper crane, tucking away the ache for another time. And in that quiet, I felt something far more dangerous than grief. I felt clarity. Because if she thought she could humiliate me so neatly, so publicly, standing on her own porch while neighbors peeked through blinds, she had forgotten exactly who raised her. And I was about to remind her. The words echoed, money and dignity bled at once, and I began tallying the cost with ice-cold hands and hotter pride. My ears rang like a kettle left too long on the stove, that thin scream at the edge of hearing. The street smelled of gasoline and wet earth after sprinklers, a sour-sweet mix that clung to my tongue. I steadied my breath by smoothing the crease of my travel folder, tickets, insurance, copies, my old ritual when storms gathered. The folder itself felt like a shield, matte and stubborn, while my pulse hammered behind it. "I already paid for your ticket," I said, voice low, tasting the copper of swallowed anger. The suitcase handle dug into my palm, embossed leather pressing tiny half-moons into my skin. She shrugged, how casually, and the gesture stung more than any shouted insult. I rubbed the key fob with my thumb the way I used to rub her back when fevers burned at night. It's non-refundable, I added. The word, non, scraped. A neighbor's wind chime tinkled thinly, each note a little laugh. I glanced at the mailbox, my old brass guardian, and realized how often I'd trusted paper to prove love. Receipts, reservations, confirmation numbers stamped like blessings. I tucked a flyaway strand of hair behind my ear, steadying the itch to scold. She shifted her weight, the rubber of her sneakers whispering on concrete. Melissa needs this, Mom. There it was again, that calm, patronizing drizzle. The air smelled faintly of her grapefruit shampoo, it used to be mine. I pressed my lips together, an old habit, the seam I sow when words want to escape unhemmed. Then give her your seat, I said, feeling the dry bite of my own sarcasm. Pay for it. The sun flared against my sunglasses. I slid them up, cleaning the lens with the edge of my scarf. Little circles, little circles. How many times have I polished what others smudged? She laughed, thin as tissue. You're being dramatic. A sparrow hopped across the driveway, head ticking, quick and undecided. My spine straightened. I thought of the spreadsheet on my laptop. Deposits, tips, vaccinations, the hand-picked khaki jacket folded with citronella sheets. I could almost smell the lemony clean of them, still sealed in my dresser drawer. I pinched the bridge of my nose, counting to 5 the way my therapist taught me when grief became a room with no doors. That jacket, I said softly, is yours. It was yours. The word was tasted of old tea, left too long, tannic and stern. She glanced away. I watched her swallow, and for a sliver of a second she looked like the child who'd once mistaken my pearl earrings for candy. I touched my earlobe now, a reflex I carry like a charm. If you've decided, I said, then I'll decide what follows. The sentence sat between us like a closed piano, quiet but heavy. Cicadas started their slow rasp. Summer's metronome clicked time on my nerve endings. I slid the folder back into my tote, the zipper's rasp as final as a judge's gavel. She checked her phone, eyes flicking, thumbs curving around that glass idol. I took in the scent of hot plastic and sunscreen. We're done here, I murmured, smoothing the blouse hem that never truly lies flat. Some fabrics, like some truths, refuse to pretend. I stepped back, heels biting gravel, and felt the first cool draft of my composure returning. Driving away, the steering wheel warm under my palms, I counted costs. Ticket, lodge, transfers, pride. The air conditioner hissed. The vents blew a manufactured peppermint that never quite covers what hurts. I tapped the wheel twice, my signal to myself, we pivot now. In the rear view, her porch shrank to a dollhouse. The sky arched impossibly blue, cruel, beautiful, uncaring. I whispered, out of habit or prayer, I couldn't tell, all right then. Consequences, I knew, would bloom like bruises, slowly, then all at once. But I also knew bruises fade, while paperwork, properly arranged, does not. I tightened my scarf knot, the silk cool on my throat, and began planning the temperature of my next move. And though my voice had been even, my heart had its own steady drum, promising a response she would not see coming, one measured in clauses and signatures, not scenes and screaming. I remember how we got here. Melissa's sugar, my daughter's distance, and every breadcrumb that led to this tidy betrayal. Back when Melissa arrived, 8 years and a lifetime ago, she smelled like vanilla candles and new paint. I remember her first handshake, soft, damp, a petal with intentions. She presented a casserole in a glass dish wrapped with a tea towel covered in cherries. I kept that towel. I still use it for bread cooling, because usefulness survives where trust does not. As we ate, I smoothed a wrinkle from the table runner. I always do that when strangers pretend to be family. Unemployed, she'd say with a sigh, fingers tracing the rim of her wineglass. Between opportunities, as if opportunity were a train late on purpose. My daughter would nod, loyal, eyes shiny. The house then smelled of roasted rosemary and hot dish soap. I stacked plates the way I stack doubts, neatly, quietly, one chip facing the wall. Over time, Melissa's compliments turned surgical. "You're so organized," she cooed, peering into my labeled spice rack like a curator. I could never keep up. My daughter laughed, a little too hard. I answered by aligning the salt and pepper, habit, yes, but also declaration. Order is my native language when chaos tries to flirt. Phone calls with my daughter began to stretch thin. Busy, she'd text, the word like a door barely opened. When she did answer, there was always a second voice somewhere, Melissa's hum, like a refrigerator you only notice when it stops. The scent of my daughter's life changed too. Less cinnamon of her old apartment, more sterile citrus, as if someone were forever cleaning away evidence. One afternoon, after I'd funded a course she wanted, project management, she'd said, a title so tidy it clinked, I found Melissa's thank you note on the counter. It was written on thick cream paper that smelled faintly of almonds and ambition. "We appreciate your generosity," it read, the "we" heavier than the period that followed. I traced the emboss with my finger, then tucked the card into a shoebox where I keep proof that I'm not imagining things. Holidays shifted. New rituals arrived without asking. Board games I don't like, desserts too sweet, toasts that sounded like commercials. I polished my wineglass stem with my napkin, tiny circles, tiny corrections, and watched my daughter watch Melissa for cues. A matching bracelet glinted on both their wrists, braided leather with a cheap silver clasp. I touched the old locket at my throat, cool as lake water, and felt foolish for keeping photos inside when passwords rule everything. When she ignored my calls for 3 days last spring, I drove over with lilies, the kind that stain your fingers orange if you're not careful. The hallway smelled of nail polish remover and microwaved butter. Melissa opened the door in slippers, her smile unapologetically perfect. "She's napping," she whispered, as if my grown child were a toddler. I set the vase down, wiped pollen from my knuckle with the hem of my cardigan, and said nothing. Silence, I've learned, is a ledger that always balances. I kept hoping the trip would be our bridge. I chose the lodges for quiet, for stars, for the hot water bottles slipped into beds it turned down, details that say, I considered you. When I folded the safari scarf for my daughter, light cotton, olive and cream, I sprayed it with my fragrance, a barely there iris. I imagined us tasting dust together, laughing with our mouths dry, clinking enamel mugs of coffee at dawn. Hope, alas, has a strong nose, it will follow the wrong scent if you let it. And yet, even in the remembering, I feel the floor hardening under my feet. Memory can be soft like bread, today I need it toasted. I run my thumb over the edge of my notebook, the paper's toothiness bites back, a pleasant reminder that I am still the one who writes. So yes, there were signs, the sugar too sweet, the distance measured in polite words, the we that displaced. I smoothed 1,000 hems instead of asking who kept wrinkling them. That's on me. The kettle is quiet now, the house smelling of lemon oil and resolve. I set my locket straight, square my shoulders, and turn the page. Next, I will stop being the bank that smiles. And when the interest comes due, it will be paid, not in shouting, but in signatures and silence. I smiled like the trapper who hears the first snap. The real work would be quiet, careful, and done with gloves on. I gave her the kind of smile people mistake for surrender. That's a skill you earn after 50, how to soften your face while your spine steels itself. That's very thoughtful of you, I told her, feeling the syllables rest on my tongue like hard candies I had no intention of swallowing. The porch smelled faintly of damp concrete and the cinnamon rolls the neighbor bakes on Sundays. My fingers brushed my tote strap, the fraying edge rough against my skin, a reminder that useful things don't have to look new. She blinked, surprised. People who expect you to explode don't know what to do when you nod instead. I had no intention of giving her a show. My revenge would be played in a smaller, quieter theater, lit by desk lamps and powered by printers. I didn't even put the car back in gear before dialing my lawyer. The phone was warm from the sun, the glass smudged with my fingerprints, proof of all the times I've used it for less dramatic purposes, like grocery lists and weather checks. His voice came on the first ring, still gravelly from sleep. "Margaret, it's early. What's wrong?" I told him, in the same tone I might use to explain a missing casserole dish. Calm, factual, with the faintest edge of lemon in my voice, bright enough to sting, not bitter enough to spit. I could almost hear him leaning back in his chair, the leather creak as familiar as the clink of his pen against the desk. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "You know," he said slowly, "this could work in your favor." The phrase sat in my chest like a warm stone. Favor. The idea tasted like black coffee, strong, bracing, not for everyone. I leaned my head back against the seat and watched a stray cat cross the street, tail high, moving as if it owned the block. "How?" I asked. My thumb traced the embroidered M on my scarf, my mother's initial, mine now. The thread was worn but held tight, like the women in my family. "Start with the will," he said. "And the trust fund clauses. Don't touch the vacation bookings yet, let her think everything is proceeding as planned." The hum of the air conditioner filled the car. I stared at my daughter's back as she stepped inside, laughing into her phone. The sound was muffled, like laughter through glass. I'd once stood at a playground fence, watching her run with the other children, her ponytail whipping like a banner. That same motion now was sharper, her body angled away from me. "All right," I said. My voice was steady. My hands rested on the steering wheel, the leather warm and slightly tacky under my palms. The plan was forming already, tight, precise, each step stitched into the next. My lawyer's instructions were clear. I began to fold them into the day like a well-worn recipe. That afternoon, I sat at my dining table with my legal folder spread out before me. The smell of lemon oil from polishing the wood lingered in the air, mingling with the faint vanilla of the candle I keep by the window. My pen, heavy, brass, a gift from my late husband, felt cool in my fingers. I twirled it once before uncapping, the small click like a pistol cocking in a quiet room. The will came first. I marked out her name from certain clauses, replacing it with conditions that would require actual care, actual presence, to fulfill. My handwriting was slow, deliberate, each loop and slash had its own spine. The trust fund received similar treatment, adjustments that would stand firm under any daylight. "Don't cancel anything yet," my lawyer had said. So I didn't. Instead, I printed fresh copies of the itinerary and slid them into the same ivory folder I'd shown her weeks ago. On the outside, it looked unchanged. On the inside, the seams were already different. I caught sight of my reflection in the dining room mirror, scarf still neat, lipstick still intact. I smoothed the hem of my blouse without thinking, fingers brushing the mother-of-pearl buttons I'd sewn on myself after one went missing last year. Repairing things is second nature, replacing them is not always the better choice. The trap took its first shape, my lawyer's name on the boarding pass. 2 days later, the travel agent's voice chirped through the phone, all polite efficiency. "Of course, Mrs. Hawthorne, we can reissue the ticket." I pictured her tapping at a keyboard, each keystroke a tiny drumbeat in my favor. "Passenger name?" she asked. I gave my lawyer's name, spelling it carefully. The scent of brewing chamomile drifted from the kitchen. The kettle clicked off, its puff of steam curling in the afternoon light. My fingers rested on the saucer's rim, the porcelain smooth and cool. He was delighted when I told him. "My wife has always dreamed of Africa," he said. I could hear her voice in the background, a burst of laughter when he relayed the news. That sound, the unforced joy of someone genuinely grateful, was a balm. The lodge booking was still under my credit card. That meant I could cancel, rearrange, or redirect at will. The power sat quietly in my pocket, like a folded note only I could read. She sent her first gloating text. I replied like honey hiding a blade. The message arrived mid-morning. "Melissa and I can't wait. You'll love having some time to yourself, Mom." Don't feel bad. I could almost smell her perfume through the phone, bright, artificial flowers. My lips curved. I typed back, of course, darling. I'm so happy for you both. The words were sugared enough to rot teeth. Then I blocked her number. The silence that followed was cool and refreshing, like stepping into shade after a too long walk in the sun. Their gloating grew bold. I let it bloom, watering it with silence and a few well-placed confirmations. 2 days later, my phone lit up with another text that smelled, somehow, of hairspray and cheap champagne. We can't wait. Melissa says you'll finally relax. I set the device face down on the linen runner, smoothing the fabric the way I smooth my temper. The kitchen carried the warm scent of cinnamon toast. I buttered a slice with small, precise strokes, the knife tapping the plate's rim, my metronome when patience is required. I replied only with a thumbs up, a tiny glyph that lets fools hear applause. I called the lodge to confirm our arrangements. The hold music had the tinny taste of a pocket radio, but the reservation itself sat solid under my name, cool as the glass paperweight I keep by the phone. All set, Mrs. Hawthorne, the clerk chirped. I capped my pen, lined it parallel to the pad, and exhaled. Let them preen. A peacock only traps itself when the tail gets heavy. That evening I opened the cedar chest where I store old maps. The wood's resinous breath rose like a forest prayer. I traced the spine of a folded atlas with my thumbnail, a habit from widowhood's early days when paper journeys were cheaper than plain ones. I penciled a few notes in the margin, alternate drives, a private guide's name. Anticipation shimmered like heat above a road, but I kept my speed steady. Tomorrow, another step. I sweetened my tone, then closed the door. Small victories are best sipped like strong tea. I texted her first, sugaring the cup. Of course, darling. I'm thrilled for you both. As the blue bubble sailed, the house smelled of Earl Grey and orange peel. I twisted the tea bag string around the spoon, a twirl, release, until the color deepened to the exact shade of resolve. Then I blocked her number. The sudden quiet rang like a bell in an empty church. I took a slow walk around the block, fingers tucked into my coat's wool pockets, brushing the smooth pebble I keep there, a talisman shaped by rivers and time. The air tasted of cold iron, someone was grilling early, smoke spicy as paprika. I rehearsed nothing. Silence deserves rehearsal the way music does. When I returned, I placed my passport atop the locket on my dresser, metal on metal, two identities that answer only to me. Before bed I rewound the travel alarm 3 times, a childhood habit I've never shaken. The click 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 soothed the part of me that likes proof. On my nightstand, the framed photo of my daughter at age 9 caught the lamplight. I dusted its edge with the cuff of my sleeve. Sleep, I told that smaller face and the woman watching her. Tomorrow we sew the lining. I switched off the lamp. Darkness smelled clean. Melissa tried the velvet approach. I answered with silk, soft to the touch, impossible to grasp. 3 days before departure, the phone rang with a number I recognized but had never dialed. I could hear the over-bright smile in Melissa's voice before she spoke. It sounded like a florist shop, wet stems, powdery lilies. I heard some rumors, she began, words perfumed with concern. I sat at my desk, palm resting on the cool brass edge, and rotated my wedding band around my finger, half a turn left, half a turn right, the movement that keeps memory from calcifying. She talked about stress, about needing rest, about hoping there are no bad feelings. I could almost taste the saccharin. I lifted my teacup, bone china thin as an eggshell, and let the bergamot steady me. No bad feelings, I echoed, smoothing the corner of the itinerary with my thumb. Paper answers to paper. That is the law I honor now. I only hope your plans don't run into complications. A small silence, her first stumble. What do you mean? Oh, Melissa, I said, lowering my voice to that warm register reserved for frightened animals and greedy people. I mean, life is full of surprises. I placed the cup on its saucer so gently the porcelain barely kissed. Across the room, my suitcase waited open on the settee, the leather releasing its faint, sweet tannin smell. Inside lay the scarf I'd planned for my daughter. I touched it once, felt the cool cotton, then folded it differently, new corners, new purpose. "Take care," I added, and ended the call. My finger hovered above the glass for a breath, then I set the phone atop the glass paperweight, pinning it like a restless moth. Tomorrow, I thought, we show our hand. They believed I was powerless, my strength was already notarized, logged, and quietly booked. After the call, I opened the safe where documents live like sleeping cats, quiet, self-contained, capable of claws. The metal door exhaled a dry, dusty breath. Inside, the updated will and trust waited with the calm of finished work. The ink's faint smell still clung to the signature lines. I traced the notary seal, raised, crisp, as if reading Braille. Power, I've learned, often feels like texture rather than thunder. I emailed my lawyer the final confirmations. His reply pinged back with a cheerful chime that reminded me of ice cubes clinking in summer lemonade. "We're set," he wrote. And, "Thank you." I smiled into the blue glow of the screen, then closed the laptop with two palms, symmetrical pressure, the way I close a book I've decided to keep. In the hallway mirror, my face wore the kind of softness that fools expect from women my age. I tucked a strand of silver hair behind my ear, left, then right, ritual restoring order. From the cedar chest, I chose a different scarf, indigo with tiny constellations. It smelled faintly of soap and far nights. Around my wrist I clasped my mother's bracelet, the one that clicks, a small, satisfying sound, when I turn my hand. Click. Decisions have music. Before sleep I laid out 3 postcards on the dresser. Lion, baobab, river at dusk. The glossy varnish caught the light. I imagined the scratch of my pen as I wrote addresses, cousins, Aunt Ruth, Mrs. Delgado who taught me long division and stubbornness. Tomorrow I would buy stamps. Tomorrow I would tell a story without a single adjective, a picture and a date, nothing more. As I slid under the quilt, the cotton smelled of sun, and resolve tucked around me like a second blanket. Morning would bring the reveal. I could almost taste it, clean as rain, sharp as citrus. I prepared the quiet procession, tickets reassigned, a photographer hired, and joy set in place like good china. At breakfast, the kitchen filled with the butter-warm scent of toast and the bright slice of marmalade. I stacked boarding passes, mine, my lawyer's, his wife's, squaring the edges with the side of my hand, a habit that turns paper into certainty. The printer exhaled one last page, a schedule for a private drive at dawn, the hour when lions smell like sun-warmed hay and old pennies. I slipped it into a leather folio whose grain I'd polished with beeswax. It shone like a promise. I called the photographer, a young woman whose laugh was dry and friendly, like autumn leaves underfoot. "You'll hardly notice me," she said. "That's the idea," I answered, drawing a line through her name on my list. Evidence without bragging. Memory that can stand in court or on a mantle. By noon, the house smelled of suitcase, zippers, nylon, a ghost of last trip's sunscreen. I rolled socks inside hiking boots, the small domesticity of it easing something in my chest. I tucked my locket beneath my blouse and pressed it flat with 2 fingers, a benediction for safekeeping. On the hall table, I placed an envelope addressed to myself with a single postcard stamp. Inside, a note. "Remember this feeling." I sealed it, the glue tasting like childhood envelopes and patient plans. Evening brought a soft rain that ticked the windows like polite knuckles. I sat by the lamp, rubbing a drop of almond oil into the leather handles, small circles, restoring what carries weight. My phone vibrated once, unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Tomorrow, I would send an itinerary that told the truth in the only language they still recognized, omission. I turned the lamp off. The room inhaled the smell of wet pavement and clean endings. On the eve of departure, I sent the itinerary with her absence printed in ink. The reaction was instant and delicious. The night before the flight, the house was steeped in the scent of fresh laundry and rain-soaked air. I sat at my desk, the lamplight warm as honey, and opened the updated itinerary. The columns gleamed in crisp black font, my name, my lawyer's name, his wife's. No third line, no trace of her. I slid my reading glasses down my nose and reread it, savoring the symmetry of the spaces. Then, with the same precision I used to fold napkins for Christmas dinner, I attached the file to an email. The subject line, itinerary update. No greeting, no sign-off. Just the clean, cool fact of the thing. I clicked send, and almost immediately, the phone shrilled. Her name lit up the screen like a flare. I answered on the second ring, letting the silence between us stretch long enough to taste. "This isn't funny," she screamed, her voice high and jagged, the kind of pitch that rattles glassware. "Where's my ticket?" I let my thumb run along the edge of the desk blotter, smooth leather worn by years of pen marks and bills paid on time. Then, softly, the way one speaks when delivering a blessing or a verdict, I said, "With someone who actually deserves it." There was a gasp on the line, sharp as tearing cloth. I didn't wait for the words that would follow. I pressed end, and the screen went black, my own face faintly reflected there. The room felt still, as if the air itself were listening. Outside, a neighbor's wind chime swayed, releasing a single, low note. I turned to my suitcase, zipped and ready, the faint scent of cedar from the armoire clinging to the fabric inside. My passport rested in the outer pocket, the cover smooth and familiar under my fingertips. I placed the phone face down, the case cool from the desk's surface. This was not a victory I needed to shout about. It was a quiet checkmate, one square at a time. Later, as I poured myself a small glass of port, the garnet liquid catching the lamplight, the phone began buzzing again, call after call, 30 in total before midnight. I let them pile up like junk mail, unopened and unworthy of attention. By the time I slipped into bed, the cotton sheets smelled faintly of lavender from last week's wash. I lay still, listening to the rain's soft percussion against the roof, and thought, tomorrow, I will walk past them with my suitcase in hand. And the world will see exactly who is traveling, and who is not. Some truths don't need explaining. They only need to be lived in front of the people who tried to steal them from you. Morning brought pounding fists and accusations. I answered with zippers, keys, and the precise click of a door that knows whom it serves. They were there at 8 sharp, the air still cool, smelling of wet concrete and the citrus cleaner I'd swabbed across the entryway last night. The first thud rattled the stained glass panel, violets and ivy vibrating like tiny bells. I smoothed the hem of my jacket, a habit that settles me like a hand on a skittish horse, and checked the brass latch I'd polished to a mirror. Through the frosted pane I made out shapes. My daughter's quick, frantic bob. Melissa's taller silhouette, arms crossed like a gate with opinions. "Open up, Mom," she shouted, her voice hoarse with a fear disguised as fury. I lifted the handle of my suitcase. The leather grip fit my palm the way an old truth fits the mouth. The hallway smelled faintly of cedar from the armoire and of the faintest ghost of lavender that clings to my scarves. "One moment," I said, the same tone I use with telemarketers and medical receptionists, civil, final. I slid on my indigo scarf with the tiny constellations, the silk cool against my throat, and gave the locket at my chest a small, centering press. When I opened the door, the morning light rushed in like a witness. Melissa's perfume arrived first, gardenia, insistently sweet, like frosting on a saltine. My daughter's eyes were red-rimmed, furious, the kind of look that used to mean a broken toy but now meant a broken entitlement. I let the screen door stay between us, its mesh a modest veil. "We need to talk," Melissa began, smile taut as a clothesline. I adjusted the angle of my suitcase, aligning the wheels with the tile grout, my little ritual of order. "We talked," I said, voice soft. "You didn't listen." They tried the chorus of appeals, guilt in soprano, logic in alto, threat in a growl underneath. The wind lifted the doormat's corner, I flattened it with my toe, a small defiance that felt like blessing my threshold. "It's my ticket," my daughter snapped, a word that tasted of tin when she said it. I reached for the envelope on the console table, cream paper, thick, my handwriting steady. "This is a copy of the charges I paid," I said, holding it as I once held report cards, proofs that go in drawers, not in arguments. "You'll note the name change processed 2 days ago." The paper made a dry little whisper as I slid it against the mesh. She refused to take it. So I tucked it back. Evidence does not chase the unwilling. Melissa's hand darted toward the screen handle. I lifted my palm, not touching, only reminding. "Don't," I said gently, and the hinge creaked as if agreeing. The kettle in the kitchen clicked to its keeping warm cycle. The house smelled faintly of bergamot and toast, domestic grace at my back. I reached past the console for my keys, their weight familiar, cool as coins. Click, car, click, front lock, click, side gate. I've always loved the language of good hardware. "I'm due at the airport," I added, turning my wrist so the bracelet made its quiet, satisfying sound, click, like punctuation. On the curb, the taxi idled, exhaling diesel and morning radio, traffic, a weather promise of clear skies. The driver stood waiting, one hand on the trunk, his impatience as polite as a yawn behind a fist. I rolled the suitcase forward. The wheels purred over the threshold strip, a cat choosing its own lap. "You're punishing me over a vacation," my daughter said, voice breaking on the last syllable. I paused just long enough to smooth my jacket again, feeling the stitch my mother taught me, invisible but strong. "No," I said, meeting her eyes through the screen's gentle crosshatch. "I'm protecting what you mistook for a bottomless well." Neighbors began to pretend they were not looking. Mrs. Vaughn, pruning her roses, breathed out a cloud of green scent. The clipping shears flashed like silver birds. Mr. Sue's sprinklers clicked alive, throwing rainbows over the fescue. Public enough, then, for a lesson without spectacle. I straightened the handle, counted to 3, my old exam ritual, and stepped onto the porch. Melissa murmured something about lawyers. I smiled, truly this time. "Darling," I said, "you're late to that party." At the taxi, the driver lifted the trunk. The rubber seal breathed a warm, sweet car smell, vinyl and sun. I placed my suitcase in as if it were a sleeping child, careful, palms flat, two-handed, the way I've always lifted what matters. My daughter took a step onto the path, then stopped. I watched the moment land, the understanding that the plane would lift without her, that the story had been edited in ink she didn't own. I wanted to touch her cheek, to say the line mothers say when there's still time to unspoil something. Instead, I pressed the locket again, a pulse of memory against skin, and chose quiet. The door's deadbolt turned with that rich, barrel-chested thrum as I locked behind me. I handed the driver the address, terminal, airline, with clarity that tasted like cold water. As we pulled away, the cab's fabric seats scratched lightly at my calves through the stockings, a small, earthly reminder that even victory has texture. In the side mirror, I saw my daughter's outline collapsing into Melissa's arm, two figures blurred by sun glare, the wind lifting their hair as if to erase their edges. The city opened ahead, bakery air, yeasty and warm at the corner, gasoline ghosts under the overpass, the clean, metallic breath of the airport already imagining us. I checked my passport by touch, cover, elastic band, boarding pass tucked like a secret between pages, and aligned it with the seam of my purse. Order, always. I exhaled and let the quiet fill me, a cathedral of unspoken things. Soon there would be ticket scanners and the gentle indignity of shoes in a plastic tray. Soon there would be sky. And later, lions at dawn, a camera's soft click, and postcards that say everything without a single sorry. At the gate, she tried one last ambush. I left her with a truth she could not misinterpret. The airport smelled of brewed coffee and rolling suitcase wheels, rubber, metal, and the faint tang of jet fuel that clings to the glass walls. My shoes clicked over polished tile, each step a reminder that I was still moving forward, while some people were not. I'd just handed my boarding pass to the attendant when I heard it, my name, sharp and urgent, slicing through the terminal's low murmur. She was running toward me, breathless, hair flying like a flag in a sudden wind. Melissa trailed behind, trying to keep up, her sandals slapping the floor. My daughter's face was flushed, eyes wide with something between desperation and rage. The smell of her perfume, synthetic lilies, hit me before she did. "Mom," she called, and for a heartbeat it was like she was 5 again, running across the schoolyard into my arms. But the arms she was running to this time were crossed. "You're punishing me over a trip?" she demanded, her voice trembling. People in the boarding line glanced over, curious in that polite, airport way, turning their heads just enough to catch the story without being caught watching. Somewhere behind me, a coffee grinder roared, drowning the silence that followed her accusation. I uncrossed my arms, resting one hand lightly on the handle of my carry-on. The leather was warm under my palm, the metal zipper pull tapping gently against the frame, steady, deliberate. "No," I said, meeting her eyes without blinking. "I'm protecting myself from someone who thinks betrayal is a casual decision." The sentence landed between us like a sealed envelope. She opened her mouth, but whatever words she'd been building died there. I saw her hands, fists that wanted to be open, and thought of the days when those hands clutched mine in parking lots. I wanted to tell her that love is not the same as permission, that forgiveness has terms, that trust can't be rebooked like a missed flight. Instead, I adjusted the strap of my purse, a slow movement that let my bracelet give its small, decisive click. The gate agent smiled at me politely. "Boarding now, ma'am." I stepped past my daughter, the scent of her shampoo brushing my shoulder, grapefruit, sharp and fleeting. Melissa muttered something about lawyers again, but I didn't turn back. My ticket slid through the scanner with a soft, satisfying beep, the kind that confirms the seat is yours and only yours. As I walked down the jet bridge, the air cooled, carrying the metallic promise of the aircraft ahead. The hum of the engines was already in my bones, steady as a heartbeat. Behind me, the boarding door closed with a solid, padded thud. Some arguments are best left unfinished. This one, I knew, had just begun for her, but for me, it was already over. I found my seat, stowed my bag, and touched the locket under my blouse. Through the oval window, the runway shimmered in the afternoon heat, ready to carry me someplace wild, someplace mine. While the savannah opened its golden throat to me, they stayed home crafting illusions. I gathered proof, peace, and a few necessary addresses. Africa greeted us with warm dust and light so clean it tasted like rain before it falls. Dawn at the lodge smelled of coffee blooming in tin mugs and damp canvas from the night's dew. I woke before the knock each morning, smoothing the edge of the mosquito net the way I smooth hems before a hard conversation, small, calming rituals that stitch courage to skin. My lawyer, Gregory, though I still call him Mr. Doyle, in my head, and his wife, Lila, moved with the delighted hush of people inside a dream they thought belonged to someone richer. When the Jeep growled to life, diesel and sun-warmed leather rose together. I clicked my mother's bracelet, soft punctuation, then climbed in. The first lions we saw were dust-colored monarchs draped in shade, their breath thick as old pennies. The photographer kept her promise. She became a breeze with a lens, catching the way my scarf lifted at the ridge, the way I held the rail with both hands, palms flat, 2 points of contact, the way I hold good choices. At sunset the sky wore bruised peaches and violets, the air cooled to the taste of iron and oranges. Lila leaned into me on the viewing deck, fingers wrapped around a sweating glass of tonic while bats stitched dusk with their tiny needles. "Thank you," she whispered, and meant it in that simple, clean way gratitude smells like crushed mint. Between drives, I wrote postcards at a teak table that smelled faintly of lemon oil and history. I bent to the task with the same care I reserve for signatures. Saw elephants at dusk, I penned to Aunt Ruth. They move like hymns. To Mrs. Delgado. Leopards know the value of silence. I dampened each stamp with a precise touch of the tongue, then pressed it flat using my locket as a weight. Evidence, yes, but also joy, mailed to the people who never charged interest on their love. On the third day I let myself look at my phone. Their profiles glittered with pretend, throwback photos posted as if now, old beaches repackaged with new captions. I could smell the stale sugar of it through the glass. Melissa wrote, "Airport Adventures," under a picture I recognized from 2 summers ago. The giveaway was my hat on my daughter's head, tilted left. I rotated my bracelet once, absorbing the ache that still arrives like weather. Then I put the phone face down on the woven mat, smoothed the fray at its corner, and ordered tea. The legal threads continued quietly, as designed. A message from Gregory's paralegal. Filings received, updates notarized. The subject line's brevity pleased me the way a good seam pleases a tailor, straight, strong, invisible from the front. I replied with a thank you and a photograph of the sunrise over the escarpment. For morale, I wrote, "Power doesn't need to snarl. Sometimes it only needs to arrive stamped and on time." One afternoon we visited a village market where the air held smoke, cardamom, and bright dye. I bought a cobalt bead from an old woman whose palms were the color of walnuts and twice as textured. "For your girl," she said, not unkindly. I felt the bead's cool circle against my thumb and pictured the daughter I once braided hair for, not the woman who tried to braid my wallet to someone else's. I tucked the bead into my pocket with the smooth river stone I always carry. 2 circles, 2 chances. At dinner, the plates came warm and white, grilled fish smelling of lemon and river. Gregory raised a quiet toast. "To late in life firsts," he said, clinking my glass. I thought of the firsts I'd never asked for, widowhood, estrangement, and of this new kind, chosen. The photographer caught our glasses mid-kiss, the candle making small gold planets in the wine. I adjusted the napkin on my lap, corners aligned, because some part of me will always believe a straight corner can rescue a crooked hour. At night, the net brushed my cheek like a mild reprimand to keep sleeping. The generator hummed. Far off, hyenas laughed with a sound like gossip finally telling the truth. I lay awake once, thinking of my daughter's face at the gate, how youth mistakes consequences for cruelty. The room smelled of sun-baked canvas and the bar of soap wrapped in brown paper. I pressed the locket and let the memory pass, the way you let a wild animal cross the road. Full stop, quiet engine, no eye contact. Before we left, the photographer spread a handful of proofs across the Jeep's hood, matte paper, the blacks deep as wells. There I was, chin lifted, hair blown back, a woman who has outlived her apologies. I selected 3 to frame, plus duplicates for a more pointed use. Lila squeezed my hand. "You look like yourself," she said. I answered by straightening the stack twice, then sliding them into the folio. "I feel like myself," I said, and realized it was true. On the flight home, the cabin smelled of warm plastic and lemon wipes. I aligned my boarding pass with the passport's edge and counted the clicks of my bracelet as the wheels left Earth. 1, 2, 3. Below, the continent turned to a quilt, then to a story I would not explain. Tomorrow, I would mail packages. Soon, I would open my door to the ordinary. And then, quietly, without a single raised voice, I would finish what I began. I returned not to confront, but to deliver, grace made sharper by the absence of any words at all. Home smelled faintly of cedar and the lemon oil I'd used before leaving, as if the house had been holding its breath. The suitcase wheels hummed over the threshold, then stilled on the hallway rug. Afternoon sun poured through the front windows, dust motes turning lazily in the light, each one a tiny, suspended witness. I set my folio on the console table, smoothing the strap where it had bent on the plane, then opened the drawer where I keep stationery. The photographs were exactly as I remembered: lions at dawn, my scarf lifting in the wind, the deck at sunset with a glass of wine in my hand. My smile was quiet but unmistakable, the sort of smile that makes liars flinch. I slipped one photo into each of 2 cream envelopes, the paper thick enough to suggest weight. No note, no signature, just the image, and on the back, the date in tidy black ink. The kettle clicked on in the kitchen, steam curling into the air like a ribbon. I wrapped my hands around the mug as it steeped, chamomile blooming in slow gold circles. My mother's bracelet clicked once against the porcelain when I lifted it. One sip, then another. The ritual calmed the urge to do anything more than I had planned. When the envelopes were sealed, glue tasting faintly of starch and memory, I pressed them under the cool brass of my paperweight, a globe that spins if you push it. I thought of their hands opening them, of the moment their eyes would take in the proof of where I had been and, more importantly, where they had not. At the post office, the air smelled of ink and cardboard. I placed each envelope on the scale, the clerk's fingers tapping the register keys with the rhythm of a metronome. "Local," I said, and slid exact change across the counter. The stamps, each a small square of sunrise, were pressed down with firm, even pressure. I carried the receipt in my wallet, though I knew I wouldn't need it. Back home, I unpacked slowly. The bead from the market rolled into my palm, cool and perfect. I set it beside the smooth river stone on the mantel, 2 circles, side by side, a private emblem. My scarf, still carrying the scent of dust and wild grass, I hung in the cedar wardrobe. My locket I kept on, pressing it once before I closed the closet door. Evening fell. Through the open window came the mingled scents of cut grass and someone's roasting chicken. I poured a glass of port, sat in my favorite chair, and watched the shadows gather. No phone calls came. I didn't expect any. Sometimes the cleanest revenge is not a dramatic unmasking, but a reminder delivered in silence, a truth that arrives without argument, without apology, and without a single extra word. I sipped, let the port settle warm in my chest, and smiled into the dark. The world outside went on, but in my house, the balance had been restored. And that was enough.